He said he wasn't worth saving, but Dawn had other plans. The townsfolk said Silver Mesa was where lost souls came to fade, and Luke Carver fit right in. His legend had died years ago, buried under whiskey and guilt. He'd hunted men across deserts, through storms, through prayers, and killed one too many. Then one morning, the stagecoach brings her, Mara Jensen, a widow, quiet as a prayer, whose eyes hold the story Luke's been running from. Her husband was his last bounty. Her forgiveness, unasked and undeserved, cuts deeper than any bullet. She wants his help finding a stolen church bell, a fool's errand, he calls it, but she says the bell belonged to a man worth dying for. As the sun dips behind the canyon, Luke faces a choice: stay buried in shame or follow her into the dark one last time. By dawn, one of them won't return, but redemption might. The wind carried dust like ash through the streets of Silver Mesa, whispering across shuttered windows and sun-bleached signs. Noon had come and gone, but the town lay quiet. Too quiet for a place built on saloons and sin. Then came the creak of saddle leather, slow and weary. Luke Carver rode in. His horse was lean, ribs showing under a dull hide. Luke wasn't much better. Hat low, coat torn at the cuff, and a face carved deep by sun and remorse. Once men had cleared the street when they saw him. Now they barely looked up. Legends die quieter than folks expect. He stopped at the livery, swung down and tossed the reins to a boy half his age. "Water him slow," Luke said, his voice a rasp. "He's seen enough hard miles." The boy nodded, eyes wide. Everybody in Silver Mesa had heard of Luke Carver, the bounty man who'd shot a preacher's son by mistake. Luke took a room above the livery, one window, one bed, one bottle. The kind of room you pay for by the night because you don't plan on seeing another dawn. He poured himself a drink before the dust had even settled on his boots. The whiskey burned, but not enough. It never did. Somewhere down below, church bells would have rung once upon a time, before they were stolen, melted, and pawned off like faith itself. Luke stared out the window, eyes fixed on nothing. The silence pressed in, thick as smoke. He'd once hunted down killers, thieves, and men who'd long forgotten the meaning of mercy. But when the law turned gray and the money came easy, Luke stopped asking who deserved the bullet. One night a man begged him to listen, to look closer. Luke didn't. The next morning the widow came to collect the body. Her name was Mara Jensen. And every drink since had her face hiding somewhere inside it. That evening, Silver Mesa's stagecoach rolled in under a fading red sky. Luke watched from the window as a lone figure stepped down, a woman in black carrying a satchel, and a silence that made the air still. The townsfolk turned to look. Some whispered, others crossed the street. But Luke knew before she even raised her head, Mara Jensen. He froze. For a heartbeat he thought she might come gunning for him, but she didn't. She just stood there, her eyes scanning the town like she was looking for something or someone. Then she started walking toward the saloon. Luke's hand twitched toward his revolver out of habit, then stopped. He wasn't sure what he'd do if she came looking. He didn't have much left in him to fight or to apologize. When she pushed through the saloon doors, conversation died. The piano stopped mid-note. Even the drunk at the bar lifted his head. Luke came down the stairs slowly, boots echoing. She turned, saw him, and for a moment neither moved. Time folded in on itself. The night of the gunfight, the rain, her husband's last breath, it all came rushing back. Mara's voice was calm, almost too calm. "I didn't come to kill you, Mr. Carver." Luke blinked. "Then what the hell for?" "To ask for your help." A bitter laugh scraped from his throat. "You don't know who you're asking." "I know exactly who I'm asking," she said, meeting his eyes. "You're the man who took my husband from me, but I need you to help me get something back, a church bell, the one he died protecting." Luke stared, the room shrinking around them. "Lady, I ain't your kind of salvation." She stepped closer, steady as stone. "Maybe not, but you're the only one who can find what's been lost." The salon watched in silence. Luke looked down at his drink, then at her hand resting on the bar. Steady, unflinching. He shook his head. You don't know what you're asking for. I do, she said softly. And I'll find it, with or without you. Then she turned and walked out into the dying light, leaving the air heavy with something Luke hadn't felt in years. Possibility. For the first time in months, Luke didn't finish his drink. He just sat there staring at the door, wondering if Mercy had just walked back into his life wearing black. Morning came to Silver Mesa slowly, with light bleeding through the dust like gold through smoke. Luke Carver hadn't slept. He'd spent the night staring at the ceiling, hearing her voice again and again. I'll find it with or without you. He told himself he didn't care. But by sunrise he was at the saloon again, nursing black coffee and pretending the world outside didn't exist. That's when she walked in. Mara Jensen wore the same black dress from the night before, the hem dusted from travel. Her satchel rested against her hip, worn leather, same as her expression, tired but unbroken. She didn't ask permission to sit. She just did. You sober enough to listen now? She asked. Luke grunted. Lady, I've been sober enough to regret it. She slid a folded paper across the table, a wanted poster so old it looked like it had been through fire. The face on it was unmistakable, Colt Brannon. Luke's jaw tightened. Where'd you get this? Your name was on the back. He took it in his hands. Sure enough, his own handwriting marked the corner, a bounty note from years ago. He'd written dead or alive under Brannon's name. He's the one who took the bell, she said. My husband was hauling it from the old mission when Brannon's gang came through. He wouldn't give it up. Luke nodded once. I remember the man. He didn't scare easily. No, Mara said quietly. He didn't, but you shot him anyway. The words landed like a bullet to the gut. Luke didn't flinch, didn't argue. He'd long run out of excuses. What makes you think Brannon still got it? Word in town says he's holed up north by Black Hollow Canyon, planning to melt the bell by dawn. The silver fetches more than the sound of faith. Luke leaned back, eyes narrowing. Then you'd best find someone else. I don't ride for ghosts. Mara's eyes flashed. Then die with them. But I'm going. Luke almost laughed at her fire. Almost. You ride into Brannon's camp alone. You won't last an hour. Then come make sure I last too. The stubborn set of her jaw reminded him of men who'd faced firing squads without blinking. He hated that it made him respect her. He stood, dropped a coin on the table, and grabbed his hat. Fine, but I'm not doing this for you. I didn't ask you to, she said. Outside, the sun was climbing, washing the desert in a blinding white heat. Luke saddled his horse, muttering under his breath. He hadn't meant to say yes, it just happened. As they rode out of town, the folks of Silver Mesa watched in silence. They saw the widow and the bounty killer ride side by side, like sin and salvation sharing the same trail. For miles they said nothing. Only the sound of hooves and wind filled the canyon. Then Mara spoke. Why'd you stop hunting? Luke didn't look at her. Got tired of the faces. The ones you killed? The ones I couldn't forget. Silence again. She studied him from the corner of her eye, the way his shoulders carried invisible weight, how every word seemed measured against guilt. As the sun sank lower, they made camp by a dry creek bed. Mara gathered wood while Luke checked his revolver. She moved with quiet resolve, like someone used to doing what needed to be done, no matter who doubted her. When the fire caught, Luke finally broke the silence. You know, there's a fine line between courage and foolishness. She met his eyes. And you don't know which side I'm on? He smirked faintly. Lady, you crossed that line when you came looking for me. She smiled, just a trace. Maybe I came looking for what's left of you instead. Luke looked away, unsettled. The flames flickered between them, painting his scarred face in golden shadow. After a long pause, he said quietly, You ever think some things ain't worth saving? Yes, she said, her voice steady. But people are. He didn't answer. He just stared into the fire until the whiskey in his veins turned to ash. By the time the stars came out, He knew there was no turning back. He was riding toward his past, and if he was lucky, maybe toward the part of himself he'd buried with it. By dawn, the desert had turned gold again, and Luke Carver was already awake, sharpening his knife by the dying fire. Mara slept against her saddle, her hand still wrapped around the strap of her satchel. She slept like someone who'd spent years without rest. Luke watched her for a long moment, wondering what kind of mercy makes a woman walk beside the man who killed her husband. He couldn't find an answer that made sense. When she stirred, he turned away, pretending to check his horse. "You ever shoot a man, Mrs. Jensen?" She blinked the sleep away. "No, but I've thought about it." He gave a dry smile. "Then you're halfway to hell already." "I reckon that's where we're headed anyway," she said, standing. "Might as well ride together." They broke camp and followed the trail north. The canyon stretched before them like a scar through the earth. Black Hollow, a place where even echoes sounded afraid. By midday, Luke spotted sign tracks, boot prints, and the faint drag marks of a heavy object. "Bell's been through here," he muttered. "Brannon's close." Mara dismounted, crouching beside the tracks. "You sure it's him?" Luke nodded. "Colt Brannon's got a bad left leg. He drags his heel. Always did since Kansas City." She looked up at him. "You hunted together." He hesitated, then nodded once. "A long time ago. Before the badges blurred and the blood started to look the same." Mara stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "And now he's the one we have to stop." He didn't answer. He just started walking, his shadow long against the rocks. As the day wore on, the silence between them grew heavy. Not angry, just full of things neither dared say. Every canyon bend seemed to whisper memories Luke wished he'd buried deeper. By late afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking the outlaw camp. Smoke curled from a fire below, and men moved around a covered wagon, rough, armed, and laughing too loudly. Luke pulled out his spyglass. There, under a canvas tarp, glinted the edge of the stolen bell. "There it is," he said quietly. Mara's breath caught. "It's real." Luke glanced at her. "You thought I was lying." "I thought maybe it was all I had left to chase." He lowered the glass, looking at her for a long beat. "You got more left than you think." Down below, Colt Brannon sat by the fire, same crooked grin Luke remembered. A man who never believed in redemption, because he'd never needed it. Mara followed Luke's gaze. "You knew he'd end like this." Luke nodded. "Men like Brannon don't die of old age." "Then why do you look sad about it?" He sighed, the sound rough. "Because I taught him everything he knows." For a long while they just watched. The thieves laughing, the flames licking at the tarp that covered the bell. Luke finally spoke. "We move after dark, quiet, fast. We get the bell and we go. And if they see us, then we pray they're bad shots." Mara gave a thin smile. "You don't seem like the praying kind." "Wasn't," he said. "Ain't sure I still am." They waited as dusk bled into night. Coyotes called in the distance. The firelight below flickered against the canyon walls. Luke sat cleaning his revolver, hands steady out of old habit. Mara sat beside him, close enough for the warmth of the barrel fire to touch them both. After a while, she said softly, "You spared a boy once, didn't you?" Luke froze. "Where'd you hear that?" "My husband told me. Said it was a mercy that didn't come cheap." "That boy was his brother." Luke's jaw tightened. He remembered the night, the rain, the trembling kid who'd dropped his gun and begged for a chance to live. Luke let him go. A week later, that same boy set up an ambush that cost Luke's partner his life. "Yeah," he said finally. "I spared him. Shouldn't have." Mara looked at him with something like pity. So that's when you stopped believing in mercy. He gave a bitter laugh. That's when I learned it doesn't pay. Maybe not in gold, she said quietly, but maybe it's the only thing that still counts. He looked at her then. Really looked. The firelight caught her eyes, fierce and soft all at once. Luke turned away. You sound like someone who ain't seen what the world does to mercy. I've seen it, she said. But I still believe in it. He didn't answer. Couldn't. Below them, Brannon's men were getting drunk. The sound of laughter turned cruel. The bell glimmered faintly under the firelight. Luke stood, pulling his hat low. We go at dawn. Mara looked up at him. Why dawn? He met her eyes. Because that's when men like me are easiest to kill. The night crawled slowly in Black Hollow Canyon. Shadows clung to the rocks, stretching long and mean while the fire below flickered against the canvas that covered the stolen bell. Luke Carver didn't sleep. He sat on a ridge above the outlaw camp, watching the flames dance like old ghosts. Mara Jensen lay a few yards away, her hat pulled low, but he knew she wasn't sleeping either. No one could sleep before walking back into the kind of hell they'd already been burned by. You should rest, Luke said quietly. She stirred, sitting up. You planning to? He gave a dry chuckle. Ain't slept right since before I met your husband. That earned him a look. Steady, unreadable. Why'd you take that job, Luke? Hunting a man like him? He hesitated, staring into the dark. Because someone offered money, and because I didn't ask enough questions. Mara nodded, eyes sad but calm. Then maybe it's time you start. The words cut deep. He wanted to tell her she didn't understand, that some men couldn't be saved because they'd already thrown away the map back. But something in her tone made him hold his tongue. Below them, a burst of laughter echoed from Brannon's camp. Luke counted at least 6 men, maybe 7, all armed, all restless. They'll melt that bell by sunrise, Luke said. Once it's gone for good. Then we don't wait for sunrise, Mara said. We move now. He looked at her, surprised. You that eager to die? I'm not that eager to finish what he started, she replied. For the first time, he almost smiled. You sound like your husband. I was his wife, she said softly. I learned to be brave standing beside him. Luke checked his revolver, 6 rounds, 1 extra hidden in his coat. His knife glinted faintly under the moon. You stay close. You see me fall, you run. Don't look back, she shook her head. I don't run anymore. He sighed. You should start. They moved at first light, the hour when the desert holds its breath, when shadows are longer than life itself. Luke led the way down the ridge, boots finding every quiet patch of sand. Mara followed, heart hammering, every breath a prayer she wasn't sure God still heard. They crept close enough to smell the whiskey on the outlaw's breath. 2 men dozed by the fire, another sharpening a knife. Colt Brannon sat apart, watching the flames, a smirk on his face that hadn't changed since the last time Luke saw him. Luke whispered, We take the wagon, quiet. If they wake... I know, Mara cut in. We fight. She moved like someone who'd made peace with dying. Luke hated that he understood it. They reached the wagon, lifted the tarp, and there it was. The church bell, cracked on one edge but still beautiful, its bronze surface etched with scripture half faded by time. Mara touched it reverently. He died trying to save this. Luke nodded. Looks like it might have been worth dying for. A voice behind them drawled, Ain't that touching? They spun around. Colt Brannon stood there, shotgun resting lazily on his shoulder, grin wide and cold. Never thought I'd see the great Luke Carver stealing from me. Luke's hand went to his revolver. "You stole from God first." Brannon laughed. "Didn't figure he'd miss it." The camp came alive, men shouting, guns drawn. Luke shoved Mara toward cover as the first shots cracked through the canyon. Bullets sparked off stone. He fired twice, dropping a man by the fire, then rolled behind a boulder. "Stay down," he barked. Mara ducked low, clutching her satchel. "Luke, there are too many." He gritted his teeth. "There always are." Brannon's voice echoed through the smoke. "You could have stayed dead, Carver. Should have." Luke peeked out, saw Brannon moving toward him, and felt something cold settle in his chest. "Maybe I'm just late to the funeral." He fired. One clean shot. Brannon dove aside, the bullet tearing through his sleeve. More gunfire erupted. Dust filled the air, acrid and choking. Luke's horse screamed from behind the ridge. Then, silence. Only the crackle of dying fire. Luke glanced over. Mara was crouched behind the bell, her hand bleeding but steady. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, it felt like time held still. He knew what came next. The dawn wasn't far. The final reckoning would come with it. "Mara," he said quietly, reloading. "If I don't make it, don't," she snapped. "You're not dying for me." He looked at her with something like respect. "Ain't for you. It's for the man I was supposed to be." The horizon began to pale, the first thread of light creeping over the canyon rim. The final fight was coming. With it, the chance to prove whether a man like Luke Carver could still do one decent thing before the sun rose. The first trace of dawn bled pale across the horizon, painting the canyon in bruised light. Smoke still hung low and gunpowder burned the air. Luke Carver crouched behind a boulder, counting bullets, lungs heaving. 2 rounds left. Maybe 3 if luck still had any pity left for him. Mara crouched beside him, her face streaked with dust and blood, but her eyes steady. She clutched her husband's old revolver, the one Luke had returned to her months after the shooting. It looked too heavy for her, but she held it like it meant something holy. "They're circling," Luke said. "Brannon's keeping 2 men on the ridge. They'll try to pin us when the light hits." Mara nodded. "Then we move before it does." Luke gave her a hard look. "You ain't done this before." "No," she said. "But I've watched enough men die doing nothing." He almost smiled. "You've got more grit than most I rode with." "Then stop wasting it and lead." Luke peeked out, scanning the camp. 2 of Brannon's men dragged a crate toward the fire. The others were shouting, angry and panicked. The bell still sat near the wagon, untouched, gleaming faintly in the dawn. "All right," he said finally. "We hit fast, loud, and aim for that wagon. You stay behind me. I'll draw their fire." Mara's jaw tightened. "Luke, you can't take them all, but didn't plan to," he cut in. "Just enough to make it count." He reloaded, cocked the hammer, and took a breath. The last one before hell. Then he moved. The first shot cracked the air wide open. Luke dropped the man at the crate, rolled and fired again, catching another in the shoulder. Mara followed, covering him, her revolver trembling but sure. She wasn't fast, but she was brave. Brannon shouted orders from behind the wagon. "Carver, you're a fool chasing ghosts." Luke shouted back, "Better ghosts than silver." Gunfire flared again. A bullet grazed his arm, burning hot. He didn't flinch. Pain had long stopped being new. He grabbed Mara's arm, pulling her toward cover behind the wagon. The church bell loomed beside them, half-shadowed, its metal glinting like a dying star. Mara pressed her hand against it, whispering something under her breath. A prayer, maybe, or a promise. "Luke," she gasped. "We can't hold here." He scanned the ridge. "We don't have to." Through the haze, he saw it, the old mining cart track leading out the back of the camp. It ran along the canyon wall, sloping toward the open desert. If they could get the bell onto that cart, they might just roll it out, if they survived the next 2 minutes. Luke grabbed the wagon handle, muscles straining. "Help me!" Together they shoved. The bell shifted, groaning against the wood. Another bullet whined past Mara's ear, chipping the wheel. She ducked, gasping, then pushed harder. Finally, the bell tipped onto the cart with a heavy clang that echoed through the canyon like judgment itself. "Every outlaw turned toward the sound. Run!" Luke barked. They sprinted, pushing the cart onto the track. Brannon's men fired wildly, bullets sparking off the rails. Mara stumbled, but Luke caught her, dragging her forward. The cart began to roll, gathering speed. Behind them, Brannon's voice roared, "You ain't running from me again, Carver." Luke turned, firing one last round over his shoulder. It missed, but it bought them a second. Sometimes that's all a dying man needs. The cart rattled down the track, wheels shrieking, bell ringing faintly with every jolt. The sound was haunting, broken, beautiful, alive. Mara clung to the edge, wind whipping through her hair. Luke ran beside the cart, boots pounding, his breath coming ragged. The canyon opened before them, wide and red in the first full light of dawn. Behind them, Brannon gave chase on horseback, shotgun in hand. His horse thundered close, gaining ground. Luke looked back, saw the glint of iron, and knew what was coming. He turned to Mara. "Jump!" She shook her head, terrified. "No, now!" He shoved her off the track just as Brannon fired. The shot tore through Luke's side, sending him staggering. He clung to the cart, blood spilling hot between his fingers. The bell struck a rock, jolting hard. Luke fell to his knees, teeth clenched, vision dimming. He saw Brannon closing in, shotgun reloaded, a grin full of hate. Luke raised his revolver, last bullet chambered. "End of the trail, Colt," he fired. The shot hit true. Brannon reeled backward, fell from his horse, and hit the dirt hard. The canyon went still. The cart slowed at the bend, the bell humming low like the breath of something divine. Mara scrambled to her feet and ran to Luke, falling beside him in the dust. He was pale, bleeding badly but still breathing. Barely. "Luke," she whispered, pressing her husband's old scarf against the wound. He gave a broken laugh. "Told you. Dawn'd come for me." She shook her head fiercely. "No, not like this." He looked at her, eyes soft, fading. "Mara, I ain't worth saving." She met his gaze, tears streaking through the dust. "Then let me prove you wrong." And as the sun crested the canyon rim, she held him tight while the bell, cracked and battered, tolled once more. The first rays of the sun spilled into Black Hollow Canyon, turning the smoke gold. The gunfire was gone now, leaving only the low hum of wind and the faint toll of the cracked church bell swaying in its cart. Mara Jensen knelt in the dust beside Luke Carver, her hands pressed to the wound in his side. Blood soaked through the scarf she'd wrapped tight, dark and stubborn. His breathing came ragged, like a man fighting the pull of something stronger than pain. "Stay with me," she said softly. "We're not done." Luke gave a faint grin. "You're a stubborn woman." "Someone has to be," she replied, tightening the knot. "You've made a lifetime out of running from mercy." He tried to sit up, groaned, and fell back. "Mercy's just a word, Mara. You live long enough out here, you learn it's the first thing folks sell and the last thing they ask for." She met his eyes, her voice steady. "Maybe that's why it matters." For a long moment they just looked at each other. The bounty man and the widow, bound by a mistake neither could undo. The morning air smelled of gunpowder and sage. A hawk circled high above, crying out into the emptiness. Mara stood and looked down the canyon trail. The bell cart had rolled to a stop against a ridge of stone, its wheels half broken but intact. The bell itself gleamed in the sun, cracked but whole enough to ring. She turned back to Luke. "We need to get you to town." He shook his head. "You won't make it far dragging me. Leave me here. Let the desert finish what I started." "Not a chance," she said. "You helped me bring back what was lost. Now I'm bringing you back too." He chuckled weakly. "You don't quit, do you?" She bent down, slipping her shoulder under his arm. "Neither did he," she whispered. With effort, she helped him to his feet. Luke bit down a groan, staggering as they started toward the trail. Each step was a small eternity, his weight heavy, her will heavier. The desert stretched before them, glowing in the light of a new day. Dust rose around their boots, and the canyon behind them seemed to sigh, as if letting go of all the ghosts that had lingered too long. They walked in silence until Luke spoke again, voice hoarse. "You ever wonder why he stood his ground? Your husband. Could have given up the bell, walked away. I asked him that once," she said. "He told me faith wasn't about what you keep, it's about what you won't let die." Luke smiled faintly. "Sounds like something worth bleeding for." "It was for him," she said quietly. "And now it is for you." They reached the rise overlooking the canyon rim. The road to Silver Mesa shimmered in the distance, a thin, winding thread of hope. Mara lowered him onto a rock, panting. Sweat ran down her temples, but her grip stayed firm. "You rest. I'll get the cart." She turned, heading back toward the bell. Behind her, Luke stared out at the dawn. The light painted his face in gold, softening the hard edges that had once made him feared. For the first time in years, he didn't look like a killer. He looked like a man trying to believe again. When Mara returned, dragging the cart, he reached out and touched the bell. The sound it gave, a soft, cracked note, wasn't perfect, but it was enough. "She'd like that sound," he murmured. "She." He hesitated. "My ma used to say every sunrise was a second chance. Never believed her till now." Mara smiled faintly. "Then don't waste it." She lifted the reins and helped him onto the cart, bracing him against the bell. His eyes fluttered shut as the wheels creaked forward, carrying them toward Silver Mesa. The trail stretched long ahead, sand, rock, and sunlight. Behind them, Black Hollow Canyon grew small, swallowed by light. Luke's voice broke the silence, low and rough. "You think God still listens to men like me?" Mara didn't look back. "He listens to anyone who's still breathing." Luke gave a small, tired smile. "Then maybe I ain't done yet." The cart rolled on, the bell swaying gently, its cracked voice ringing with every bump. Not clear, not perfect, but alive. And for Luke Carver, that was enough to keep his eyes open as the dawn finally broke clean over the desert. By the time the sun stood high over the desert, Silver Mesa shimmered in the heat like a mirage. Dust swirled down its single main street, and the town's few early risers stopped what they were doing when they saw the wagon coming. One woman in black, driving a broken cart that carried a man slumped against a cracked bronze bell. Mara Jensen's arms trembled from the strain of the reins. Sweat cut through the dust on her cheeks, but her eyes never left the road ahead. She guided the cart through the silence, past the saloon, the general store, the churchyard. Every face that turned toward her was the same: shock, pity, disbelief, because they recognized the man in the cart. Luke Carver, once the fastest gun west of the Pecos, now pale as parchment, blood seeping through his bandages. Mara pulled the horse to a stop outside the old church. Its steeple was gone, burned years ago in a fire no one ever bothered to fix. The bell tower stood empty, a hollow frame against the sky. A few townsfolk approached cautiously. The blacksmith muttered, "Is that Carver?" Mara ignored them, jumping down and untying the reins. "Get me the doctor," she ordered. Now, when no one moved, she snapped, "You all heard me." A young boy ran off toward the back of town. The others just stared. Luke stirred, opening his eyes halfway. His voice came low and cracked. "You brought me back." Mara kneeled beside him. "You're still breathing. That's what counts," he gave a weak laugh. "You're out of your mind," she smiled faintly. "Takes one to find one." Minutes passed before Doc Albright arrived, white beard, sleeves rolled up. He took one look at Luke and muttered, "I'll need whiskey, bandages, and more luck than I've got." "Use mine," Mara said simply. They carried Luke inside, laid him on the church pews, the same ones where her husband used to pray. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. As Albright worked, Luke drifted in and out. Through the haze of pain and morphine, he saw Mara kneeling nearby, whispering something he couldn't quite catch. Not anger, not vengeance, just peace. When he came to, it was dusk. The light through the broken window cast long shadows across the wooden floor. The sound of hammering echoed outside, someone fixing the bell's support frame. Luke tried to move, but pain pinned him down. Mara appeared beside him, wiping her hands on a rag. "You're supposed to rest," she said. He looked at her, voice barely more than a whisper. "Why'd you save me, Mara? After what I did, after what I took from you?" She sat beside him, calm and steady. "Because hate would have buried me with him. Forgiveness, it keeps me alive." He turned his head away. "You think forgiving me makes it right?" "No," she said softly. "But it stops it from owning me." Silence settled between them, thick as smoke. Outside, the wind picked up, making the empty tower groan. Luke swallowed hard. "When I shot your husband, I told myself it was just a job. Didn't even remember his name till they sent me his wife's letter. I wrote that letter," she said. He blinked, surprised. "I wanted you to remember him," she continued. "Not what he did. Who he was." Luke's throat tightened. "I read it. Every word. And?" He exhaled slowly. "I didn't deserve it, but I never forgot." Mara nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "Then maybe that's why you're still here." He tried to laugh, but it came out broken. "Here ain't much of a reward." She stood looking toward the empty tower. "It will be when the bell rings again." Outside, townsfolk had gathered, curious but wary. Together they were lifting the restored bell, patched, reforged, and scarred like the man it was brought back for. As the sun dipped low, Mara walked out to watch them work. Luke, still weak, struggled to his feet and followed. Leaning against the doorway, the bell hung crooked but proud, swaying gently in the evening wind. Luke stared up at it, eyes wet with something he hadn't let himself feel in years. "Never thought I'd live to see it again." Mara turned to him. "Then don't waste what you've been given." He nodded slowly. "Maybe I won't." The last light of day burned red across Silver Mesa, and for the first time in a long time, Luke Carver didn't feel like a ghost. He felt forgiven. The desert dawn came soft and golden, spilling over Silver Mesa like a promise. The air carried a chill, the kind that made every sound ring sharper. The creak of the church gate, the faint rustle of cottonwood leaves, and the heavy stillness before a bell's first toll. Luke Carver stood in the churchyard, his coat buttoned against the cold. The sling around his arm was still there, but the wound beneath it had closed. Not healed, not fully, but enough to let him move without wincing. He looked older than he had weeks ago, yet lighter too, as if the burden he'd carried for years had been set down somewhere between the canyon and this yard. Mara Jensen approached quietly, holding a candle that flickered against the pale light. She'd been up before sunrise, her hands still stained from work. "They're ready," she said softly. Luke nodded. "Then let's finish it." The two of them walked toward the scaffold where the bell hung, patched bronze gleaming faintly in the dawn. The same bell her husband had died protecting. The same bell Luke had helped bring home. A few townsfolk had gathered, still unsure whether to pray or stay silent. They watched the pair in reverent quiet. Mara stepped to the base of the tower and set her candle beside a wooden plaque engraved with her husband's name. Then she turned to Luke, offering him the rope. He hesitated. "You sure about this?" "You carried it this far," she said. "It's yours to ring." Luke looked up at the bell, at the scarred metal patched with new iron. It was imperfect, cracked down one side, but when the wind touched it, it gave a faint hum as if waiting to speak again. He took the rope in his good hand, the fibers rough against his skin. For a long moment he said nothing. The crowd shifted, whispering. Then Luke spoke, his voice low but steady. "I've spent my life taking things that didn't belong to me. Today I give something back." He pulled the rope, the bell swung once, slow and heavy. The sound that followed was deep, rough, uneven, but beautiful in its own way. It filled the air, rolled across the rooftops, and drifted into the desert beyond. Another toll and another, each one softer, truer, as though the bell remembered what it was meant to do. The townsfolk bowed their heads. Some crossed themselves. Others simply listened. Luke let go of the rope, breathing hard. When he turned, Mara was smiling through quiet tears. "He'd be proud," she said. Luke nodded, voice thick. "So would she." "She?" "My ma," he said softly, "used to tell me the Lord don't quit on a man till the man quits on himself." He looked toward the horizon. "Guess I never stopped trying." They stood together as the sun crested the ridge, painting the town gold. The bell's echo faded, replaced by birdsong and the hum of a waking world. Mara lit another candle beside the first, the wax catching the light. "He used to say dawn was the hour when heaven looked closest to earth." Luke smiled faintly. "Reckon he was right." She turned to him, her expression warm. "What will you do now?" He looked toward the stables, then back at her. "Maybe stay a while." "Fix the fences. Help folks that need it," Mara nodded. "That'd suit this town fine." Luke took a deep breath, the morning air filling his lungs. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of ghosts pressing down on him, only the quiet peace of being where he was supposed to be. He tipped his hat to her. "Thank you, Mara, for not letting me die back there." She smiled. "You were never meant to." As she turned toward the church, Luke lingered a moment longer, watching the sunrise stretch across the land. The light caught his face, softening the scars, tracing the lines of a man remade. The bell tolled once more, unbidden, gentle, steady, a final voiceover carried through the still air. She saw a man in the ashes and made him believe the fire could still warm. Luke Carver walked into the dawn, the sound of the bell fading behind him. No longer the hunter, no longer the haunted, just a man finally worth saving. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Wild West tales of redemption and love. Your support keeps the campfire stories alive.